Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today, I'd like to welcome to the show Treena Reilkoff, COO of TLR Solutions for Conflict. Treena, welcome back.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
Now, I wanted to talk to you about an article that was recently published on verywellhealth.com talking about burnout. Now,
Mhm.
I've talked about this before. However, what I don't quite understand is how do we recognize not if we're burnt out, but that we're heading down that path of potentially being burnt out? How do we recognize it early?
Well, that's a great question, and it's unique for everybody because it starts with, do you know yourself? Do you know your own stress levels? Do you know when in life you're overwhelmed? Because we can never prepare for different events that encounter us that accumulate to overstress. And work and the conditions right now start piling up. So it's also the question to ask, are you male or female? And what stage in life are you going through that might be also impacting how you are dealing with stress in the workplace? So it starts with asking yourself, you think you're getting good sleep, but you wake up and you're still just lethargic. You're having brain fog and it's continued over a longer period of time. You're depending on coffee or different stimulants that are legal, but it's that little pick me up that you know yourself best and something has changed. So, not just knowing and recognizing what are the environmental changes at work or at home, what are some additional stresses, but when your body is trying to cope and nothing's working anymore.
You mentioned two interesting things there, a difference between men and women and
Mhm.
stage of life. Can you expand on both of those? How it's different for men and women, I assume, and I guess age groups, how it manifests itself or progresses differently
Yeah.
for
Well, if you
different stages
think
of life.
back, like reflecting on younger years, right? Our level of stress, our level of energy, wanting to grow, succeed, right? It doesn't stop. It's based on your personality, but now there's more information coming out, especially for women, when we're looking at the impact of menopause, and postmenopause. Here we have hormonal changes that are contributing to the deterioration of hormones in our body. And these hormones are also impacting how we show up at work, our ability, our performance levels, but they're also basically clashing and banging heads with the brain fog, the lethargy, the nutrients. So for women, depending on what life stage you're in, that hormonal change is also influencing your risk to burnout. And then when we're looking at men, they too have their own cycle, but I'm not well versed in it because I'm focusing on my stage of life right now. But I do know men do have a cycle, just like women have a cycle that's not talked about a lot. And then we also have to look when we're looking at burnout, still that unspoken that everybody's trying to ignore and wipe out the long-term effects of COVID and the brain fog and what it's done to us. So it's not just looking at burnout as it's a human, personal, individual responsibility. Burnout is also the systems in the workplace responsibility of how do we mitigate people from burning out and how do we set up the environment to support healthy workplaces. And I had to actually go all the way to Australia for the first ever psychological health and safety conference in the world 2 years ago to meet one of the gurus, two gurus, but one in person, who's from Canada, teaching in Australia, who's a burnout specialist. And he was the one, Peter Leiter, Leiter, and Christina, she couldn't make it, so she was on Zoom, Christina Maslock. They were the ones who are doing more research and have discovered and have the evidence base that burnout, it's not just an individual responsibility. It's 50% individual for the person, and then it's 50% employer organization responsibility. Because you can start burning out, you can recognize all the factors, and you come in and you can have that conversation and have that psychologically safe environment to go to your leader, direct report, and say, hey, I'm burning out. And it's their responsibility as well is to look at the systems in place, the processes, the policies, and what's going on that's contributing to your burnout. So you could recognize it and try and do everything, but if you keep entering that same environment that's taking away everything you're trying and you have no decision-making authority over, you're still going to burn out.
I'm glad you mentioned about the organization there, because one of the questions I was going to ask is it leadership or organizational leadership or the organization and its processes, HR, I don't know, responsible for triggering burnout? Because it could be someone who's potentially excited about being there
Mhm.
and then takes on more than they can handle all at once. And it
Oh
should
yeah,
be
for
the
sure.
organization who says, slow down. Or,
Yeah.
like who, I guess I don't really want to point a finger of blame, but where does it start?
Well, if you think about it again, 50-50 responsibility. So how we show up for work, the decisions we're in control of, the choices we make reflect on our performance and the work we do. But we're not the decision makers. And when it comes to the organizational, it's both the systems and the leaders, because the leaders are the one who the individual, the employee goes to, no matter what your rank or hierarchy is, whoever your direct report is, that is who you go to help have discussions. And if you're struggling or, life crises happen, they do happen, but you go to that direct report to help. What can I do to support? And then whether or not they're the decision maker, but when we're looking at the systems in place, it's not the frontline decision maker and that direct report. It's the organizational higher ups who are in control of reviewing policies, processes, and updating them to support individuals. So when we're looking at the psychosocial hazards in the workplace, common psychosocial hazards that impact the process and the symptoms or the systems is workload. Workload is a hazard. Workload is identified under occupational health and safety as a psychosocial hazard. So who has that ability to control the workload? Well, both the organization, the leader, and the individual. But if the individual is saying, okay, I'm overwhelmed and, short staff right now is a huge one. So how do organizations, how do the leaders recognize workload's a psychosocial hazard? They're short staffed, so that individual employee doesn't have the ability. They're getting the work to cover others. So how is that being mitigated so they don't burn out? Because the outcomes still have to go on. And then you look at, okay, you're short staffed now, the leader, the process, policies, nothing's changing. Where's the reward and recognition? Because when you give a lot and you keep giving, and you're never rewarded or recognized for all that extra work, it starts to break you down. And reward and recognition is also another psychosocial factor that can turn into a hazard that contributes to the workplace burnout of employees.
What about the leadership themselves? Because everyone reports to somebody.
Right.
They could be potentially experiencing burnout as well. The exact same things that you just went through, they can experience. Is it
Yeah.
different for them?
I don't believe it's different. It's whether or not, depending on what level of leadership you're in, do you have that trust in your direct report? And has the organization created both a psychologically safe workplace environment where you feel safe to go to your leader and say, I'm burnout, or what, I'm teetering. I'm getting all these symptoms. I'm teetering. I need something has to switch. Something has to change. And when we ask and look at that, people, because our biases go in, we go to that quick answer that our unconscious system one thinking has always done, right? And we don't say, hey, how can I support you today? How could I support you this week? Right? We assume that this request to help support because we're starting to burn out means it's going to be the rest of the duration of your working life. We like to assume the worst when it's, what, no matter what role, what status, what senior level you're at hierarchy, we're all human. So if you can't
Mhm.
create that organizational, psychological, safe environment where role modeling of trust and vulnerability occurs, how are you going to mitigate the risk for anybody in your organization or business to prevent that burnout if everybody's afraid to talk about it?
It seems to be um, a chicken and the egg type situation here because I'm thinking with leadership, they are the ones who's creating the policy and the culture and supposed to make sure everything's in place for the employees, but yet they can experience the exact same thing. So they have to somehow recognize when their policy and their leadership is not working, not just because employees are suffering, but they're suffering too. And usually, if we know the saying of what trickles down,
Yeah.
when something is wrong, how do you address burnout that way? Because one person is burnt out, and because of them, a CEO, a COO, a senior vice president, whoever, that's trickling on down then to the
Yeah.
directors and the data analyst levels. So how do you address that? How do you recognize it to change it?
To recognize it, what the term I like to use is you got to become conflict curious. Conflict is a risk, and whether it's invisible conflict, unresolved conflict, historical conflict, or present conflict, it's a risk. And if you're not willing to get a baseline of what is all the risks and conflicts in your organization that are there, how are you going to be preventative? So when you look like globally, the World Health Organization has a lot of information. Burnout is recognized in the World Health Organization. Burnout is an outcome to psychosocial hazards in the workplace that have to be mitigated. So just like, it snowstormed here in Toronto in the GTA, ice is the hazard, the risk is slip and fall. The potential for injury could be a bruise, twist, broken leg, or how you fall. It could be death,
Hmm.
right? So that's a physical hazard. Workload is the hazard. The risk is stress, sick leave, burnout. Burnout can escalate to a mental health diagnosis. And then that all means leave. People got to go rest. People got to get healthy and recoup and recover and rehab, just like a broken leg or a broken ankle. You got to do it with your mental health as well. And the scary part is it can also lead to death, which is suicide. So organizations, leaders have to ask themselves, if the information is out there, World Health Organization recognizes it under the ISO standards, the 45003 of psychosocial hazards and risks. It is an outcome. It is recognized. It is recognized in the Canadian National Standards. When you're conducting a culture psychosocial risk survey, it's under occupational health and safety. So it's out there. It's why are people choosing to ignore it, avoid it, dismiss it, or being human because of our biases say, you know what, it's not that bad here. If you don't go and get a baseline foundation to ensure your organizational policies, process, people are safe, and it's like, you're building the skyscraper, you need a solid foundation. We need solid foundations now at work.
It really does trickle out, doesn't it? When one person has or is experiencing burnout, it does trickle to those around them. And if those around them are impacted, they start feeling something negative,
Yeah.
or they back away, which makes the person feeling with burnout feel even worse. And then you can lead to, some of those terrible consequences that you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
No one, I guess in a way, no one is really suffering alone. And I think maybe that's something people need to really realize. We're all here to help each other.
Yeah. And it's again recognizing it's not an individual only concern, it's a systems concern, right? So in the organization, when's the last time you looked to see if your policies were updated to reflect mitigation of psychosocial hazards? When have you, as a team, talked about, not only feedback, but the lessons learned? Have you used those lessons to build your risk resiliency and turn them into risk resiliency, right? What's that point of where the cost to the person, to the organization, to the time, to the reputation of your organization or business, that you become proactive? Humans, we're reactive. So it's time to step up and be proactive because there's a cost in every level. Human capacity, reputation, time, money, and potential litigation. Because if you, depending on what country you're in, if you're not in compliance with your occupational health and safety regulations and not mitigating psychosocial hazards, it is now the responsibility, like in Canada, of the employer.
Yeah. And on that note, that's a perfect spot to end today's segment. And a quick little shout out there to Dr. Gav Schneider, since you mentioned Brazilians. So, hi, Gav.
Hi, Gab.
Treena, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you sharing your time.
Always appreciated to be a part of this.